So I'm going to demo a couple of things today. The first one that I'm going to demo is something that I had built last week, the week before, and started. It was something that was in progress, but I showed it during our last REDZone. The idea was, and this came from a previous REDZone where we talked about tracking survey submissions and submission times. And when you have a survey, you could track the survey time using the smart variable survey duration, which tracks how long it took for the survey to be complete. But this is only for surveys. And so someone had the question, how would you do this for regular data entry in REDCap without a survey? And so the idea here was trying to mimic that functionality using the JavaScript injector and some date time fields. So here's what I built. One field is just the start time and it defaults to now. And then the end time is it refreshes. So this was the hard part. This is the thing that took some coding and is using the JavaScript injector. And then this is just a date diff. So I'm going to walk through all the little components. The one thing that was missing last week when I demoed this was getting this to stop. So if I hit save and stay, then the end time stops and the timer stops. Last week when I demoed it, as soon as you open the form again, this picked up the current time and this updated the elapsed time. So let me just walk you through what I built and the functionality that I'm using. So REDCap has a function that's already built into it that grabs the current time. And when you load a form, so if you have, let me open this in the designer. If you have a form that or a field, a date field that you want to default to the current time or the current date and time, depending on if it's whatever format you have for the field validation here. If it's date time, it'll grab the date and time. If it's time, it'll just grab the time. And then you have the format of how you want the value to be returned. So you have two options with action tags. One is now and the other is today. Today will only return the date. So the reason I'm using now is because I want the time value. So if you put time in or put now at now here, whenever this form loads, a function fires in the background for REDCap that automatically grabs the current time. So the next thing that I had to figure out was how to generate the end time. And I'd kind of gone through a rabbit hole of trying to figure out how to grab the time off the server and things like that. And, whenever you click the submit button, if I could grab the time value using JavaScript. And it was actually far easier than I thought because I can just grab. So if we open up the inspect tab here, and let me make this a little smaller so it'll fit a little better. For the now button, and let me make this bigger now that we have it. So on the now button, when you click that button, there's this function called set now time. And so I had the idea that I could just grab that function and have whatever code I set fire that function to grab the current time. And the idea essentially is if I'm in this project, if I'm just clicking now, like every time. So basically my code is clicking the now button. is pretty much how you can think about it. So the function takes two arguments, and it's the start time, which is the value of the field that I have here in the designer. You can see it's called start time, start underscore time, and then the value of true, meaning set the time. So what I did was, there's nothing on this field. I just have it set to a time field. But in the JavaScript injector, what I'm doing is I'm running a code that grabs that now time every second. And let me show you in the Visual Studio Code because it's easier to see. So when the window loads, I'm checking. So I'll explain this here in a little bit, but the idea is I'm setting an interval every second, and every second I'm firing this function, which is identical to the one that REDCap sets when the form loads. But I'm doing it on the end time field. So whenever we go back to, let me just add another record. When the record loads, the value for the start time is automatically set because that's the now action tag. And then my code starts to fire. Every second, it's grabbing that current time. And here, what I have is, so the problem was getting it to stop once I've submitted this record. And if somebody, because if it would capture the time and you'd close it out and it'd be perfect. But as soon as somebody opened it up, it would just start again, but it would do the current time. So if I open this up 2 days from now, the time elapsed time would shoot up like crazy because it would pick the now time as the end time. So trying to figure out how to stop this, what I ended up finding was the easiest way was, instead of hooking it to the save button on a click or any of these, because there's multiple areas where you can save, I noticed that when you have a record that is saved, the window changes. There's some things that show up that don't show up when you initially load the form. So if I save and stay, when it reloads, you can see this section down here is visible now. So because now there's data, this delete button shows up. So I have this code hooked to, if the delete button shows up, is visible, then don't run this code. But if it's not visible, run the code, which essentially is saying if I open up this form fresh, if somebody starts entering data fresh, start running this code. And then as soon as they hit save and stay or save and go to the next form or save and exit, that kind of thing, it stops the code. And then the next time somebody opens this record, it's checking to see if this delete button is visible. And the reason its length is equal to 0, but that's because that's how you can check to see if this element in this page actually exists. So you can see here, there's a div with an ID of underscore underscore delete buttons underscore underscore dash div. And this whole div doesn't exist when you open up a new form. So in JavaScript or jQuery, you basically, this is set to 0 because it doesn't exist. The length of this is non-existent. So I'm saying if it's 0, then run the timer. But if it exists, then the length is 1. And so then the timer won't run again.
Manny,
Yes.
is that delete buttons thing related at all to user rights?
That's a good question. Yes, that is a good question because I believe it is. It would only be if somebody could have access to delete records. So let me make a note of that because I might have to hook it to something else. um, to stop that.
No, wait. Um, it it's the permission is to delete a record, not to delete data on a form. So if you have permission to enter data on the form, you have permission to delete data for this form only. I'm pretty sure that's the case because we don't. I mean, that would sort of create a nightmare for people, and I'm not sure you can fully check that because you have permissions. But if you scroll down, you should see that you do not have delete record permission, but
Right.
it is showing up. It,
Yeah, and I was just looking here under the data viewing rights. So I think as long as I have view and edit permissions, that's fine. But if I had read only for
oh
that
yeah,
instrument,
yeah, absolutely. But
yeah,
if you had that, if you didn't have view and edit permissions, then you could never even start the
right,
process of entering data. So
right.
I think that you're safe for those people that are entering data. And you know where this is really, I think, important is for surveys. So when a survey, because we're always looking for the ways to capture people that could be doing entering data through a bot or whatever, and to be able to find that an elapsed time for a 40 question form is 10 seconds, then you're very suspicious that you've had data entered as a bot, which is why this whole field and this demonstration is so important because it's one more tool to help trap that information so that you can use it to verify whether something is real or not, like in those projects that have gift cards. But people should be able to see that delete data form regardless of, as long as they have permission to enter data in the first place, then they should be able to see it.
That makes sense. And another thing, just for demo purposes, these are all live fields except for this one. I mean, it's because it's a calculated field, um, it's read only, but ideally what you would want when you design this is you would want these to be read only fields so that they can't be edited because like this one here has it set to 75 and it's already saved, but if I click now, it's going to change. And so you lose that data if you save it and overwrite it. Um, so you would want these as read only and possibly like if you do have it hooked to a survey, then you would want the action tag um, as hidden survey. So that way it's not showing up on the survey. You could also hide them, in if you just want hidden completely, because then you could create a report that shows all these values so you don't have to look at them in the records. But if you do want to see them when you open up a record, then you would want to select hidden survey so they don't show up on the survey so somebody can't see that you're tracking the time, but the data is being saved. And just for clarity, one thing I didn't explain is the elapsed time, and that's just simply a date diff function, and that's here in the special functions. It's one of the ones that it's one of the older functions that REDCap has, and essentially you just select you have date diff, and then you select which date you want and date or time value, and then the second value, and then what units you want. And then you also can have a sign value because you don't usually have to worry about that unless you're dealing with times that are going to be happening like in the future or in the past and you want to know days ahead or days behind, or if it's 15 minutes ahead or 15 minutes behind, then you want the sign value because you want to know if it's going one direction or the other. But if you just want to know the difference, you don't have to have the sign value there. Um, and in the equation that I have seconds. So I'm just saying take the difference between the start time and the end time value and just give me that difference in seconds. So even though it's a date diff, it does time as well. And in the description here, it explains that if you want years, it's lowercase y. If you want months, it's capital M. And if you want days, it's lowercase d. Hours is lowercase h. Lowercase m is minutes, and lowercase s is seconds. So you have all these parameters that you can put in, or these, if you, whatever units you want. So if you do have something that's longer, if you want it in minutes, you can have it that way. But seconds was just easier for me to do because I'm not tracking like long periods of time. And then just to reiterate, for people who aren't familiar with the JavaScript external module, it's the JavaScript injector. You would just go to enable a module if it's not enabled and type it here and it'll show up, and then you enable it. And then when you configure it, the easiest thing, you just select enabled, and then you put your code in the box here. And then I don't usually select all project pages because that does that's the entire project. Like you can see here, it's on the home page, the dashboard, the add edit records. You really only want it for like data entry and surveys. So here, if I wanted it on surveys, I would select always on. So I just have data entry pages and surveys. And then you can also, if you want to just, if you have a bunch of instruments and you only want it to be applied to a single instrument, you can just have it here, select it. If you want multiple instruments, you could create another one here. The other thing with the module is this whole chunk here is for one JavaScript snippet. If you want another function for JavaScript, you can click on the plus here and it'll add a whole group again. So if you have different functionality that you want, or functionality that's for one instrument and another functionality that's for another instrument, you can have these kind of broken out. And I'll put this JavaScript code up when we upload it to the website. I'll put this up and I'll create an XML of this project. So if you want to create your own project and see how it runs, you can do that. You would just have to enable the, you would just have to enable the JavaScript injector and then download this as a text file and just copy and paste it. Because with the project XMLs, it'll create the project, but it doesn't grab the JavaScript code that you need for the functionality. So I'll put those on the website. Anybody have any questions about that?